Welcome back, Daisy Cakes, to my list of top 100 fantasy authors. This is part 7, if you can believe it. Who am I? I am Daisy Ex Machina, the drag queen detective who investigates all things speculative in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. And yes, I've compiled a top 100 list of fantasy writers. I'm also doing a list of top 100 science fiction authors, so be sure to check that out too. The lists are in alphabetical order in groups of 10. We are starting with Holly Lisle, who was born in 1960, and I just found out she died a few weeks ago, just shy of her 64th birthday. And yeah, I am in kind of shock. Lisle is what I think of as an author's author. She should be much more well-known, I think. But again, she's another of those writers who never really took off. But she wrote a lot about how to write and offered tons of advice to writers, eventually putting together some really great writing courses. So it's really a loss to the writing community that she's passed away. Her debut novel was First in the Mist, published in 1991, which is the first book in the Hell trilogy, which won the Compton Award. But what I recommend is the Secret Text trilogy, which starts with Diplomacy of Wolves, published in 1998. I personally don't think the cover and title did justice to the story about Kate Galway, a woman who is a diplomat to the Great House of Galway. She uncovers a plot to kill her family and has to decide whether or not to use a secret weapon. Speaking of secrets, Kate has a secret that absolutely no one can find out. What I love about this book is the world building, which is really deep and full of surprises, and the plotting, which is what I think Lisle is a master of, and those are two things she is known for as a writing teacher. Rest in peace, Holly. Scott Lynch was born in 1978, and his debut novel, The Lives of Locke Lamora, was a huge success when it came out in 2006. It is about a pair of con artists, Locke Lamora, who is a mastermind, and Gene Tannen, who is more of a strongman. And they are both members of the Gentlemen Bastards, a group of confidence tricksters. The setting is inspired by medieval Venice, and they fight against the mysterious Grey King who is taking over the criminal underworld. Even though the story is pretty grim, and there are a lot of dark magic and mysteries woven throughout, the amazing part about this book is the writing voice, the style. It is so cheeky and rich and deep. I think it's one of the most amazing fantasy voices I've ever read, up there with Patrick Rothfuss. It is the first part of a series that continues with Red Seas Under Red Skies, published in 2007, and The Republic of Thieves, published in 2013. So the last book was over 10 years ago, and there are supposed to be several more books in the series. So Lynch is suffering from a case of George R.R. Martindom. But even so, just to get a taste of that wonderful and unique writing style, I highly recommend The Lives of Locke Lamora. You cannot be a fantasy reader without at least knowing the name of Sarah J. Maas. She was born in 1986 and has become one of the most successful fantasy authors of modern times. She started writing the novel that would become her debut at the age of 16, that is, Throne of Glass. It wasn't finished until 10 years later in 2012, and it was an instant success. But I want to talk about the first novel in one of her biggest series, A Court of Thorns and Roses, published in 2015. Now, what I think is interesting is that Maas is known as a young adult novelist, and this was marketed as young adult. But the main character, Feyre, was young, but not that young. She's 19. And normally, young adult, the protagonists are under 18. This woman, Feyre, slays a wolf, being in the wrong place in the wrong time, and is punished by a Fey Lord, Tamlin. This is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and it is dark and spicy. It really leans in hard on romance subplots like hate to love and lovers' triangles. And guess what? Even though I usually don't read romantices, I enjoyed this novel and recommend it for those who enjoy romantices. But what I think is really interesting is as the series progressed, it eventually stopped being marketed as young adult and moved into the adult market, or new adult, which I think is a stupid category. But I can't think of any series that shifted age categories midway in. You know, I have to include at least one children's author in these lists. So how about Tahereh Mafi, an Iranian author born in 1988? Mafi debuted with Shatter Me in 2011, a young adult dystopian thriller. But I want to talk about her middle grade series, which starts with Furthermore, published in 2016. This is so much fun. It's as if a denizen of Wonderland goes through a portal to an even weirder Wonderland. The main character is Alice Alexis Queensmeadow, who is a girl born without color and without magic, where everyone else in Fernwood is full of color and magic. So when her father disappears, she goes looking for him in the land of Furthermore with Oliver, a boy with secrets and lies. If you like Alice in Wonderland type portal fantasies that are maybe just a little bit dark, I think you'll love Furthermore. Gregory Maguire was born in 1954 and is still active today at the age of 70. He started as a children's author with The Lightning Time, published in 1978, and since then he's written almost 24 children's books, but of course, he is mostly known for Wicked, The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West, published in 1995. If you've been living under a rock, this takes a Wicked Witch from Frank L. Baum's Oz story, actually mostly from the movies, and turns it on its head, reimagining Ephelba as the Wicked Witch and Glinda, who would later be Glinda, as the Good Witch, who are just two really misunderstood people going to school in the Emerald City. This is definitely not a children's story. It is very literary and dark and deep. What I also really love about this book is that when it came out, it really wasn't a top-selling bestseller because not that many people knew about it. It was very niche, but then it was adapted into a Broadway musical, and only then did people discover the novel and how wonderful it is, and it spent 26 weeks on the bestseller list. The musical has been adapted as a movie, which will be out later this year. But I'll tell you, the novel is a lot different than the musical, and I urge you to check out the book. I picked up John Marco's debut novel, Jackal of Nar, in 1999, and I was immediately hooked. Here's another brilliant fantasy author who came out strong, but then disappeared. So I hope people will rediscover him. The Jackal of Nar is the first book in the Tyrants and Kings trilogy. It is about Ricius Vantran, who is a general in an empire run by immortals with crystal blue eyes. He is ordered to stamp down a religious uprising, and at first he does so successfully, but then his eyes are opened that the empire he supports may actually be quite evil. It turns out the immortal emperor and a select group of cronies who are also immortal have been taking a longevity drug that turns their eyes crystal blue and also makes them go insane. I think this is a terrific book. There's a bit of dark fantasy, a bit of military fantasy, and maybe even some science fantasy. The Jackal of Nar was followed by The Grand Design in 2000 and concludes with The Saints of the Sword in 2001. Man, I really love these covers. It's time to bring out one of the big guns of fantasy. I mentioned him before, George R.R. Martin, born in 1948 and at 75 is still active. At least I hope he's still active because he hasn't finished his series, A Song of Fire and Ice, that started with Game of Thrones, published in 1996. Now, like many people, this is a novel I found Martin with, but he didn't come out of nowhere. He started publishing science fiction as early as 1970. In fact, his first short story was nominated for a Hugo. His debut novel was Dying of the Light, which was published in 1977, and it too was nominated for the Hugo. But for those of us who are epic fantasy buffs, we flock to Game of Thrones. It's a truly monumental story about the Seven Kingdoms and the Stark family who live in the north, where an enormous wall protects the kingdom from a land of ice for reasons that are forgotten. But when the rumor of winter is coming begins wending its way through the kingdom, we know something is up. Too bad the kingdom, which has just overthrown the Targaryen tyrants who once rode dragons, it's going through yet another rebellion when the new King Robert Baratheon dies. I mean, you probably know all this, thanks to the HBO mega hit series Game of Thrones, which is amazing. But I think the books are even more amazing. So rich in world building, character arcs, politics. There's so much to love. And yes, it is a dark fantasy, but there are 5 books out, and there are plans for a total of 7. So the series is unfinished. But hey, the series started when Martin was in his 40s, and now he's 75, so let's give him a little grace. I flip-flopped on whether to put Julian May in either the sci-fi or fantasy list. May was born in 1931 and died in 2017 at the age of 86. Her first short story, Dune Roller, was published in 1950 in astounding science fiction. Between 1956 and 1981, she wrote over 250 books for children and young adults. 250! I found her when she published her incredible adult science fiction novel, The Many-Colored Land, in 1981, about time travelers who exile themselves in a one-way trip to the Pliocene era. But the novel that really fascinated me was Black Trillium, published in 1990. This was an experiment between 3 authors, Marion Zimmer Bradley, Andre Norton, and Julian May. Now, I'm very conflicted when it comes to Marion Zimmer Bradley, but that won't stop me from recommending this series. The experiment was that this story about 3 princesses would be divided into 3 parts, and each author would take a point of view of one of the princesses. When their kingdom is invaded by a dark magician, the 3 princesses, Hermes, Anagil, and Kadia, would each go on a quest to find a piece of a magical talisman, and when they bring them together, it will summon their inheritance of controlling the ancient magic of the Black Trillium. Apparently, and I found this out as I researched it, this book wasn't really well critically received, but I really thought it was good. May went on to write 2 more in the series, Blood Trillium, published in 1992, and Sky Trillium, published in 1996. I know I've mentioned Brian McClellan before. McClellan was born in 1986 and debuted with Promise of Blood in 2013, the first book in the Powder Mage series. I know many people avoid it because it's either military fantasy or set in a world with guns, and that's true. There is a certain class of mage who can manipulate gunpowder, ergo powder mage. But there is so much more to this epic fantasy. Part of the story is told through a detective named Adamet trying to solve the mystery of the last words of a royal magic user. Oh, and by the way, the kingdom of Adro has just gone through a revolution to overthrow a tyrant, and the military leader is a powder mage named Tamis, who finds himself as the reluctant leader. Tamis' son is Taniel Two-Shot. He's another powder mage who's particularly talented and has some serious issues with his father. There are politics, including with a labor union, a really strong and intricate magic system, characters who are gritty yet honorable. Oh, and there are some deities who turn everything topsy-turvy. I highly recommend the Powder Mage trilogy and its sequel, the trilogy Gods of Blood and Powder, which starts with Sin of the Empire, published in 2017. Finally, we end this group of 10 authors with Seanan McGuire, born in 1978, who writes fantasy under her own name and science fiction under the pseudonym Mira Grant. She is very prolific, especially in short-form fiction, ever since her first short story was published in 2008. She may be most well known for her Wayward Children series of novellas. I've only read the first volume, Every Heart a Doorway, but I immediately loved it. The story is about a recovery house for underage kids who have returned from a journey through a portal fantasy. But what I'm going to recommend is Middle Game, published in 2020, which was nominated for a Hugo and won the Locus Award for Best Fantasy. It is a contemporary fantasy about an alchemist who creates two children, a boy and a girl, named Roger and Dodger, who are psychically connected as children, but then kind of lose that as they grow older. One of them is a master of languages, and the other is a master of mathematics. As adults, they alternate between exploring their powers and rejecting them. The alchemist who created them, James Reed, has his own agenda, as does yet another person he created, Aaron, who gets involved in Roger and Dodger's lives. The story is wild, probably considered a sci-fi fantasy mashup. I think it's literary, and it's a novel you really don't want to miss. That's it for part 7 of the 10-part series of my list of top 100 fantasy authors. Let me know what you think of these authors down in the comments. And while you're there, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Until we meet again, may all the books you read